Hooper again.
You're a mile away from home. Shit isn't working. You know, you're just like, oh, well, the easiest thing is to quit.
82nd Wallaby captain.
The lower you pull a rubber band, the higher it can shoot.
But I love those moments now. They're some of the most rewarding bits.
Michael Hooper is a Wallabies legend known for his relentless drive, unmatched grit, and game-changing plays on the field.
As an athlete, your definition of a healthy ego and maybe an unhealthy ego is?
Yeah, I mean, it's how you define ego. When you say, oh, that guy's got an ego, that's not necessarily a good thing. A healthy ego would be understanding what you're good at and what strengths you can bring to the table. Then how can you get those even better? I think it's a level of control and comfort that it gives you that. Where it starts becoming negative is...
Michael Hooper, you played for the Wallabies in 125 tests. You are the 82nd Australian captain, the youngest over 50 years, and you are one of the most decorated players in Australian rugby history. Welcome to the Agency Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Dude, what a phenomenal amount of feats in such a small period of time when you were so young.
Yeah, no, it happens quick. I think when you think of it, well, now I've finished my career, you're kind of never thinking about what's been before you or what you've done, or certainly this is the way I sort of approached it, what you've been done. You're just kind of rolling on, you know, there's another tournament coming, there's another trophy to try and win. On a team level, you know, it's a huge, exciting thing. It's a really fast-paced, moving game, particularly now in the modern game. There's not many off weeks in a year, so there's plenty that's ahead. And you know, sometimes there's a little bit of a regret because you don't appreciate some of the things that have happened through the career on you're representing your family and your friends, and you don't get to dive into that and enjoy it. I didn't certainly probably lap some of those times up, but. It was a great experience and quite condensed. Still pretty young in the terms of a professional athlete now, but the time was right for me to sort of call it.
And we were joking before about how we're a similar age. So I'm 34. I hope you don't mind I reveal your age, which is you're 32. And we're joking that we played at Habbo Hotel around the same time. So we might have met.
Yeah.
Who knows?
We could have met online. Yeah.
And so, dude, you became the captain of the Wallabies in 2014 at age 22. That, for someone at such a young age, is, I imagine, quite daunting because you've got a team of potential players that are like 34, 35, that have kids, and here you are, 22, captaining the team.
Yeah, I was completely naive at the time, to be fair. Like, look, what I was doing and why I was put in that position was I was playing consistently. I was playing well, and I had been in the team for a couple of years, and I was playing consistently. I wasn't picked at that time to be the captain. The captain got injured. I was vice captain alongside another player, and he did a season-long injury. Didn't actually injured his knee, Stephen Moore, and then I stepped up into that role, and within that role, I was playing well, and I think, you know, I was young, so the coaching staff at the time saw it as a good sort of apprenticeship into that position. Now, when I look back, I was completely not ready for the job, I think.
Why do you think you weren't ready?
Well, I think, you don't know what you don't know, but I was nervous around how I could probably ask for help to upskill myself. So very much I went insular as opposed to, you know, going out and going, okay, well, I don't know this. How can I improve? How can I upskill myself? So if things do occur, or if things are occurring, who do I reach out to get some help, to get, you know, maybe a past player or outside of the industry to someone who may see a similar thing, because business, sport, life, like, it's all pretty similar, or the themes of these issues or problems, adversity are happening everywhere. So what are some of the solutions I could have, you know, benefited from asking in and around? But I went insular a lot of the times, and it was a tricky time. Even though we had a great year, we won a Super Rugby title that year in 2014. We were doing actually quite well as a Wallaby team through that time as well, winning more than we're losing. But, you know, every game when you lose, you think the world's ending in your little microcosm that is rugby. And it's not until you actually step out and you realise of course you're trying your best and everyone wants to win, but it's not that big. Like, it's not the end of the world. But sometimes I probably took it as that.
Well, that's the thing about hindsight. I think when you look back on things, you can easily say to yourself, well, I would have done this or changed this or adapted things other different ways. I think when you take hindsight into account, it's difficult because at the time you're doing the best you can with the tools you have, with the mindset you have. So I guess going back into your 22-year-old mind at the time, like, was there any imposter syndrome? Was there any fear about, going from, I guess, second in command to being the captain? Like, what was that transition like? What were the insecurities that came to the surface in those moments?
Yeah, so hindsight's an interesting one, and I think I don't regret anything that happened, and I don't regret anything that happened or occurred, because then it teaches you something. So what I didn't do at the time is, and I mentioned this just now, is I didn't ask for help. So I got hit up by some great previous players saying, "Hey, if you ever need anything, give me a call," and I didn't call them. And
Who were some of those players?
To name a few, some Wallaby captains, John Eales, George Gregan, friends, so some really class people. And, that's the great thing about the rugby community. Like, they'd seen and done things before and similar situations that I'd been in, and go, if I can help this guy, I'd love to help him. Now, how did I interpret that as a 22-year-old guy? Well, if I reach out and speak to them and go, "Hey, mate, I'm having this problem, or this is occurring," then my impression is then they know that I don't know what I'm talking about.
Oh, okay. So like maybe
So I don't know if
ego
that's
or
potentially a little bit of ego. Now, I don't like, at times, certainly through my career, I've had an ego of trying to protect things that I'd done or doing. But I think it was more just nervousness. Like, I was young, I was 22. I was trying to figure myself out, still trying to be a part of the team, still trying to, I probably a little bit individual in my mindset as well. I was trying to be, my goal was to try and be the best player in the world. And you've got to be a little bit selfish to do that. So, to make that switch from going, okay, well, I'm just going to try and really focus in on be a part of the team, be a good team man, but how can I be the best player I can be, to then shifting to what are the team's needs, and, balancing then what are the team's needs, how can I contribute to making everyone function their best, and then also I need to perform. And there's a structure, and as time went on, there's a structure and a way that works for me that I became better at doing that, and how that works for me might be different to someone else. But if I asked for help in those earlier times and earlier periods, I think I could have sped up the timeline for me, because if I'd gotten advice of, say, one of those people I'd mentioned, and he said, this is what's happening, this is what you could do, and I agree with it, great. Or if I go, oh, I don't agree with that, that's still good, because then I sort of understand it as, well, I've got a way to do things now. And where I was sitting was, because I didn't ask for help or didn't really go out because I was worried and concerned about what other people might think, I think then I I just question myself constantly and don't actually choose a path. And I think that's the opportunity I missed. But no regrets, because now I think it's a real part of me, and one of the things I stand by is really important.
I think, some of the things you touched on there, one, which is ego, two, which is like, hindsight doesn't really help after the fact. When you're in those moments, you can just take the lessons while they're there. If you were to go, I guess, back in time and ask yourself, like, as an athlete, what's your opinion on ego? Like, is it something that is a necessity for an athlete to have an ego? Is it something that can get in the way? Like, how do you get that balance?
It's how you define ego.
How would you define ego? As an
Well,
athlete,
I feel like sometimes ego can be misconstrued as like being something that's a negative.
Okay.
And
I would agree with that.
yeah, like when you say, "Oh, that guy's got an ego," that's not necessarily a good thing, is it? When you say that. But if someone said, "Oh, geez, Michael's got an ego," I'd be like, "Oh, geez, I don't want that into
Like, I don't want to have an ego.
Yeah, I don't want people to have that." But
if
you
were
want
just
to play to be confident,
totally. So, like, as an athlete, like, what would you say, as an athlete, your definition of a healthy ego and maybe an unhealthy ego is?
Well, I think a healthy ego would be understanding what you're good at and what strengths you can bring to the table, and then also how can you get those even better, and then what are the things that aren't your strong suits, which we all have as well. So where can you definitely improve, and where is something where, hey, I'm just going to stay out of that. Like my position in the team, well, I was a forward, played up front. You make a lot of tackles, you get through a lot of work. You sit in a meeting and they might be discussing about, putting plays together or things like that. And the ego says, oh, I want to contribute to this conversation. Yeah, I've been around a while. I should throw my hat in the ring. But the reality is going, hey, I actually don't have the level of expertise that probably, gives my opinion real strength in this. So I should just sit back and let the people that actually really do know what's going on think about it. But then also not too little to sort of sit back at the back of the room and go, oh, that's their job. Also to, ask and try and help where you can get the best result if there is a valid opinion that comes to mind. So I think it is nuanced, a healthy ego. But, I'm interested to hear what you think and, in the world that you've lived in, and then also viewing what sport looks like. We see so much about big egos, and that creates good players, confident players, and competing in everything they do. What's your take on it all?
I think you're right in many ways. Like, I would classify the word ego as maybe potentially what I would call a briefcase word. And by briefcase word, I think everyone's interpretation of ego is potentially different. I think if I think about sports and high performers, you kind of have to have somewhat a disillusioned level of confidence, like enough to pull you through something maybe you haven't dealt with before, and go, take a deep breath, persevere, push through, and kind of like act out the moment as if you know what you're doing, and then like reflect on it later. In business, I think a healthy ego for me personally is like having some self-confidence and some belief that like I can hold my own, I can bring my value to the table, I can have an opinion, I can help people. I think where it can be unhealthy in business is when you're not allowing yourself to be as contemplative on how you're operating. So what I mean by this is, if you're in a meeting, oftentimes CEOs will just kind of blast out their opinions and not really listen to anyone in the room because they're the CEO, and why would they listen to anyone? I think depending on what room you're in, it doesn't matter who has an opinion or an idea. It's like the best idea wins. And I think to have a healthy ego in business is to go, hey guys, we have a big target we're trying to hit. It's maybe unrealistic that we can hit this target, but I think we can if we pull all these resources together. What do you guys think? And like pulling in different people to weigh in their opinions, and just making sure as a CEO, you're kind of focused on the stuff that you can bring to the equation, but not dampening everyone else's opinions, thoughts, ideas, and so on. So I think you have to have a level of charisma and demand and foresight, but at the same time, you got to kind of know when to like accelerate and when to break, if that makes sense.
There's a hard balance, isn't it? Because as a CEO, you would assume, or someone that's been around, a player in the team or person in the business, has seen a lot more than, say, a first year player in the team or employee. But that employee might have one of the best answers, but he probably won't. So getting
Unlikely.
so
maybe
unlikely,
like statistically
but
less.
So you sit this opens up a whole can of worms. You sit down in a meeting room, and however many people, how much weight do you give to everyone's opinion? And how do you balance that? How do you talk through that as being a situation, as being something that is almost graded but can't be graded in a way? So it's a very tough dynamic to encourage, the importance of, get your voice heard or your idea heard, so the best idea wins out. But the execution of it is a real challenge as well.
I would agree with that. And there's also a layer, what I would call like frame of thinking. So have you read, you might not have read this, there's a book called Six Hat Thinking by Edward de Bono. Great book, Six Hat Thinking by Edward de Bono. And he writes in the book where there's 6 ways of thinking. So there's like an emotional way of thinking where you're thinking purely from like, I have a feeling and it's this. My gut says to me this. The second one is a black hat, which is like pure skepticism, pure negativity, like being a total Debbie Downer and stripping everything back. Then you have optimism and all these different hats and frame of thinking. So I think if, let's just say you put a C-suite of people together, or you put a team of athletes together, from your experience, would you say that there's the person on the team who's typically negative, and then the person on the team who's typically too optimistic, and the person on the team who's super emotional, and then the person on the team who's like factual and evidence-based? These are all hats. And what the book talks about is like, how do you get an effective team in sports or in the boardroom? And it's like, everyone should learn how to wear all the hats.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's that. I was going to ask you, what's the solution to all these hats, and how do you get the right result? He says that you got to learn how to wear all hats. And
yeah. So hypothetically, let's just say you were having a meeting with the Wallabies, and like you guys sat down and you're like, okay, cool. Like, we need to hit a goal this year, and the goal is this. how do we all feel about the goal? You go around, everyone tells their feelings. And if they get off their hat, you're like, like blue hat, which is like, we're not talking about facts right now. We're talking about feelings. What do you feel? Then when everyone's expressed their feelings, you go around again. Let's talk about the facts. Then you go around again and you talk about all the risks. Around again, let's talk about all the opportunities until everyone's voices are heard. And then it's like everything is on the table to be discussed. The point is, I think ego is difficult because it depends how things are being conversed, what the experience is, what the thought behind it is, what the intention behind it is, and so on. I think when it comes to sport, like what's been your experience, in the locker room versus on the field? Like, have you seen a myriad of different egos kind of orchestrally like working together to try to win the sport?
Yeah, and I think that's what you want. That's the benefit of a team. You want people to see things differently because that's where you're going to get the best idea wins out. Like 15 me's is going to be a hopeless team. I believe that. Like we'll be good at one thing and one thing alone.
Right.
But there's going to be so much stuff that we miss out on. And that's the beauty of rugby, of different sports, is it's a puzzle. You got to fill the pieces. There's different size and shape pieces that all fit together. And rugby is certainly a game like that. But it's a tricky one with sport because when you're playing well, there's somewhat a level of confidence and bravado that you can bring to the table.
Works,
so maybe you have a cracking game on the weekend, and this is where that sort of self-understanding is really important. But have a cracking game on the weekend, then the Monday meeting rolls around. You're like, oh, I've got a voice today,
Yeah.
But then definitely, something that you notice in the locker room is when players are down on confidence, down on form, a bit more reserved. You don't not as quick to jump up and make a statement, and to cut through that is really important because if there's a player who's down on confidence but has a really good idea, it's a shame if that just goes to waste and it's squashed out by someone who's like, like I'm doesn't say this, but overtly, because it's not the Australian way some of the time, but to go, yeah, I'm playing well, so I think this. But usually, sometimes the best idea is the most convincing idea, or not the best idea, sorry. The idea that wins out is someone who says it in the most convincing way or comes from a place of, more confidence in the idea. It's like, if you sell me that idea, we're coming in, we're going to follow it. So, you don't want it to be too one-way swayed.
How do you think the Wallabies have been able to manage that over the years? And how would you describe the era that I guess you played in?
Yeah, I mean, we had, a topsy-turvy sort of time as we, throughout my career, would win some big games and then lose some games that we probably should win. And consistency was probably a real difficult piece for us. We had a great opportunity and also a real hard challenge in the sense that we played a team a lot this is New Zealand, through the time that they were just the best team in the world consistently. So
the All Blacks, yeah.
Yeah, the All Blacks.
Yeah.
So from my time, 2012 through to 2023 was my last test. With the Wallabies, the All Blacks won they won a World Cup in 11, a World Cup in 15, semi-finalists in 2019. We played them 3 times a year, every year. And so, I mean, close to 50% of my games would have been against New Zealand, so that's going to be hard. I say that was the challenge side of it. The opportunity side of it was the fact that I loved that opportunity and that challenge because you beat them, you're best in the world. So the fact that we could play them a lot was a real gift, but it was also a punish at sometimes because we got beat a lot. But the idea of winning was so sweet. So it was a challenging time in terms of how I relate that to ego. Yeah, I mean, because the success wasn't there, there's change within the team. There's personnel change, there's coaching change, there's all these different things. And with those different elements, it's the same as different employees or different bosses or whatever, you have different ways and ideas of doing things and managing that under the pressure that is media, that is, contracts, that is all these different things that financial health of the game that all play, and trickle down that pressure that trickles down to team performance. And that makes it tricky.
I would agree with that. And I think you have to deal with it a lot. You've got the audience, you've got the media, you've got your coach, you've got the contracts. There's all these moving parts. And some would actually argue that you really captained through probably some of the most difficult years in the Wallabies and performed really well. How did you manage to remain, I guess, clear-minded and like balanced as an athlete despite like all the turbulence of everything else that was going on?
Well, one of the benefits of, as we talked about before, of being a captain early is I got exposure to some of that stuff early, and a real recognition that, oh God, there's a whole lot of stuff out there that I have no idea on. I need to start getting to work with, whether it was asking for help or reading books or starting to understand how I could improve. And that in turn really motivated me and kept renewing the wheel, like sharpening the axe. Like I don't think it was one of the benefits of not having success. I was hungry for success. And, so what do you do in spite of that? You try and get better. And that's was always my view is, I wasn't satisfied, which was a torment at some times, but also probably why I was able to stay hungry and stay consistent.
So when you mentioned like the torment side of things, do you think in your minds as an athlete, there's a certain pedigree of that that's necessary for an athlete to perform?
Yes, there is an obsession with that was the way I built. I was hungry for success, and I mentioned some of my goals earlier, and they were to be a part of a team that won big trophies. The World Cup and the Bledisloe, which neither I got to hold, got close, but didn't get to hold either of them. They were really exciting. And then just to try and be the best number 7 that I could be, and stay at the top of my game for as long as I could. Then the benefits of 2, well, for the team side of things, we play in a super hyper competitive part of the world, like I mentioned with New Zealand, and my position as well was number 7 and had really good history. So the level and the competition around that spot was very high. So I was very lucky in the sense that there was great motivators, and also the torment comes from it's like, well, God, like if I'm having a day off or a week off, what's the other guy doing? So there's that. That's the torment side of it, which is healthy and unhealthy at times, but like I think channeled the right way, it's healthy.
How can you channel, I guess, frustration and disappointment and angst, anxiety, what have you? How do you find ways to channel that into the right place?
All different ones. As time went on, like let's talk about anxiety. So anxiety to start off with, like I think there's a level of anxiety that's always going to be there, and there's anxiety is healthy to an extent. And I've had it at an extent which hasn't been healthy, but to an extent it can be healthy because it's that reminder. It's like, oh, have I covered all bases here? That's healthy. Okay, yep, I have. Great, can put that to bed. Where it's not healthy is when it's that rumination of things that you can't control and things that are always in your future, that are always happening, and starting to try and control the uncontrollables and da. So I think learning how to accept that these thoughts are natural and normal, and then to let those go. So going into game as an example. So waking up Saturday morning, you've got a test match on that night, and the mind starts going, God, I hope I play well. I hope I don't get injured. Is the team prepared? Have we done all the work this week? What's the weather going to be? Looking outside, oh, I didn't sleep that well last night. Is that going to affect my game? So there's some of the questions that the mind just starts throwing out. Now, there becomes a choice with, I don't have a choice of those questions coming into my head. What I do have a choice is how I interpret them after that. So, and I had to learn about this stuff. But what I started to see worked for me is that's an uncontrollable thing. So, have I done everything this week? Yep, I've done everything I can, except that thought's going to come, and let it go. Now, it's a really hard thing for me because like I told you, that torment of the mind. But to be able to let that go and to understand, to go into the game going, I've done all the work I can. I've done all the things that I said I was going to do at the start of the week. Now I can just enjoy the game and put myself, and you talk about flow. People, sportsmen, athletes, other parts of the world talk about flow a lot. What is flow to me? Flow is just being here now, so I can compete quicker. For if I'm not thinking about what could happen and I'm just doing, I'm going to have a quicker response time than someone else. And I think when I was playing my best, that's where I was at.
I like that you mentioned flow state as a part of this, and I want to come back to flow. Just to, I guess, touch on anxiety and the nerves before a game, or whoever is listening to this and things that they're anxious about. How do you define anxiety. Some would describe it as like fear of the unknown or fear of the future or what's to come. Do you think it's exact, or do you think there's more to it than that?
There's more to it, and probably I wouldn't want to talk too much on it because I'm not an expert. I'm an expert on what goes on in my head. Well, actually, I'm not an expert on what goes on in my head. That's a wrong statement. I think I'm getting better at understanding how my head functions. So throughout my career, yeah, if I look back and I go, you know, we get knocked out of a World Cup, and a week later I see some semi-finals play. I'm like, I've got to start running. Like, I just got to start running so I'm fit for next year. It's like, it's complete, like, whereas I think if I look back on it and I go, well, what I need to do is give I get that you want to, I get that I want to run and I want to, you know, stay fit and stay healthy for next year. But what's the right plan in this situation? So instead, what I did years and years ago is I would go, okay, I just need to do it now. Whereas, okay, yep, that thought's come into my head. I can choose, you know, what path I want to take after it and what's the best path and, you know, that sort of thing. So, yeah, I don't want to get into the, you know, nitty gritty of what that looks like because I can't speak on, you know, for a lot of people what that looks like.
What about just from your own experience?
In terms of anxiety?
Yeah, what were some things that you were able to do to, I guess, help manage it or help navigate it? You know, I remember when we had Drew Mitchell on the pod, he would talk about before a game, typically he would go throw up. And he had all these thoughts and emotions come up, and then he would throw up, and then he'd go out in the field and he'd feel great. And it was just like a weird thing where he like built it up inside, and that was his method or process to kind of get ready for a game. Did you have anything like that in the locker room that would help psych you into the right state or get you ready to go into the flow state?
Yeah, so yeah, there's a lot. As athletes, I get incredibly superstitious. So understanding what's a routine and what's a superstition. So for me, what a good week looks like is I'll sit down on a Sunday and I go, okay, what are the 3 things I want to carry into the game? Okay, I want an early involvement in the game. I want to have good leg speed and I want to enjoy myself. Okay, great. So we're going to train Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday. So I want to implement those 3 things into Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, and then on Saturday, that's how I want to play. So how can I do that in what a Monday session looks like? How can I do that in a Tuesday, Thursday, Friday session? And then once I get to game day, okay, those questions are still going to pop in my head. Oh, should I have done more in the gym? Should I have done more at training? Get that that's your thoughts. But did we tick all the boxes that we needed to tick? Because there's a difference between needs and wants. If I tick, you know, and why I say there's a difference is you can only control what you can control. So a need would be, well, I need to do a couple of tackles just to get myself in the mindset. A want would be I'd want to do 30 good tackles in the week, but that's unrealistic. So no, okay, great. No, we've ticked that box. And that becomes really important, I think, as you get as an older athlete because you just can't do the volume that you can as a younger player. So it becomes really important on being strategic around what's important. So then when you get to game day, it's like, mind starts racing. Am I going to play well? Well, how am I going to play well? Well, I want to get an early involvement. I want to have good leg speed and I want to enjoy myself and be in the moment. Great. Okay. That's what I need to focus on. But what if let's just, okay, breathe. And that's probably the next thing is just breathing. So that's just an anchor that was good. And there's been some great players that have had anchors. I think there's some noise made around some New Zealand players that had anchors and I can't reference them exactly. But for me, it was just, a breath and carry on or pacing. I'd pace a lot on the field, and pacing was my form of just sort of staying in the moment.
And when you say anchor, you're talking about like a ritual or something to kind of switch states or kind of jolt yourself back
stay in the moment, so not get carried away in thoughts that might, you know, take you down a wormhole. And I don't know if I mentioned this within that, but the routine superstition. So superstition would be like, wearing the same swimmers every match because I played a good game in them. And I had those. Or
did you wear the same every match?
Well, no, not every match in my career, but I had points where I'm like, oh yeah, like I want to have the same, like doing well in these. So obviously washed. Not going to not wash them, you know, going to keep them clean. But that's my game pair. I play in those and I just play. I don't wear those at training. They're my budgies that I wear only in game day. And that was probably the extent. And then it was tough to break because initially when you're young, when I was young, I tried to grasp on things that was almost like you try and control control a lot. So, I played well when I had that the night before I played. So maybe, that's a reason why I played well. I'll stick with that. Or maybe I did this I had a swim before the game. Oh, that made me play well. But that doesn't make you play well. What makes you play well is the training and the process and the things that you do within the week. Hence why I talk about the 3 things that were important for me during the week. That's the stuff that's going to make you play well, is that, you've trained it, you've repped it. So when the lights come on, that's your baseline. That's where you live. Rather than, if I had a chocolate the night before a game, that's not going to make me play well, but I like it. So I might stick with it. So for me, as the career went on, it was understanding, okay, is this a superstition or is this a routine? And there is a difference. Like, okay, well, I know I'm better when I eat blah, blah, blah day before the game. I feel good. That's, so that's a routine, I think. And that's different to a superstition.
The interesting thing, I think, with the superstition is, like, do you believe that is potentially a luck thing or a spiritual thing? Or do you think it's more about, like, control and having certainty over just getting your psyche in the right place of, like, okay, cool, like, this is potentially a superstition, but, like, it just gives your brain a little nudge of, like, hey, it's all good, everything's gonna be okay, the same budget as you were last time.
Yeah, I definitely do. I think it's a level of control and comfort that it gives you, that where it starts becoming negative is you're on your way to a bus to the game.
Forgot your budgies.
And yeah, you forget your budgies or something like that. Or you're like, I usually feel this way on game day. Like, why aren't I feeling this way? Oh no. And you spiral, you go, I'm going to play shit, all that sort of stuff. And that's where it can get a bit topsy-turvy. So I loved a Roger Federer thing. He was like, he tried to have no superstitions, but that's a superstition. And he recognized that. He's like, I try and have no superstitions now, but that's actually a superstition that I don't try and do the same thing. And you look at like a Nadal, I think he gets peppered all the time about his routine before he takes a serve. He like adjusts this, just that, wipes sweat off his brow. It's always the same. Every time he serves, it's always the same. And he's asked if it's a superstition. He goes, no, this is just my way of preparing to hit the best serve I can. But that's his interpretation of it. And I think it's brilliant both ways.
I think that's interesting. Do you think, like, having mentioned, I guess, going to flow state, like when you're in a game, was there a certain moment where things would kick into gear for you? Was it straight off the jump? Like, how did you make sure you could, during a match where it really counted, like you would lock into flow state?
Yeah, I from my personal experience, I can't go, I'm in flow state. Like, how good would that be?
Decision.
You got sports mode on the car and you just go, bing, and you flip it into sports mode.
If it
that
were
doesn't
only that
exist.
easy.
How good would that be if you could just, you're like, geez, I'll just put it in gear now. It doesn't work like that. I think for me, getting in flow state was doing that process that I talked about. Have I ticked my boxes for the week? Accept that there's going to be nervousness that comes, and accept whatever sort of moment I'm in. But rugby's a contact sport. So one of my 3 factors at all times was I just wanted to get into the game somehow. And getting into the game could look like just really good communication. It could look like a good tackle. It could look like, carrying the ball. Could look like, any one of those things. So, and then once you have an involvement, then it's okay, what's the next one? And then boom, all of a sudden you're like, I'm having a good game. And that's a recognition of, that's almost bring you out and go, yep, good, but what can I do now? Yeah.
And you find that you're in that flow state when you're not thinking too far ahead, you're not dwelling in the past, you're kind of right then and there.
Yeah,
living it.
And I think it's not actually a conscious recognition of being in flow state. It's just like, it's... the ball's there, I'm going to get it.
Yeah.
So, like...
It's very immediate.
Yeah, it's very immediate.
Yeah.
It's not the sort of, I'm in flow state. Yeah, no, I'm feeling it. It's, when you play video games, mate, and I didn't play much sport video games, but like someone will just turn fire. One of the players like just turns fire mid-game and everything they touch turns to gold. Like that's, I guess, the gaming equivalent of a flow state.
I got a funny story around that. So I was a big Counter-Strike guy. And for those that play Counter-Strike, it's a very nuanced technical skill set. And you got to kind of eat shit for like a year or 2 before you can play well. But when you start playing well, you feel like a god because you're just like in absolute flow state. I was pretty good at Counter-Strike, and I played a lot of ranked matches, and I was getting quite competitive at one point. But I read the book The Art of War by Sun Tzu, and that completely revolutionized how good of a gamer I was. So for example, just to get a little diabolical here, like I'd be mid-game and I'd be like, okay, my whole team are dead. There's 4 on the opposing team. In Sun Tzu's Art of War, he talks about like taking the high ground, or appear weak when you're strong, or appear strong when you're weak, or what have you. But there was I can't remember exactly what it was, but like essentially when you're outnumbered, flee from battle and then pick them off one at a time. Just that one tactic like completely took my KD ratio from like 7-1 to like 14-1. The point I'm getting at here is like, were there any books or wisdom or anything that really gave you a transformational output in the game?
Oh, Sun Tzu's a badass, isn't he? Like,
Yeah.
he had it figured out a long time ago.
Business owners, if you're stuck using one platform for every project, you're probably stuck in a growth bottleneck. More clients means more hires, which just adds noise and cuts into profits. To break the loop, you need flexible tools that don't stretch your resources. Wix Studio is a smart addition to your business toolkit. Intuitive by design, your team can quickly master the platform and focus on the work that matters the most. Then keep up the momentum with a built-in management tool, a unified dashboard, reusable assets, and a Figma plugin that turns static design into launch-ready websites. With robust native business solutions like bookings, e-commerce, and events, you can take any project at any scale without the added cost of third-party plugins. Plus, Wix Studio is a low-maintenance platform, meaning you can redirect the client budget towards real growth initiatives. Think more value for clients, steady income streams, and stronger relationships. To get started, simply go to wix.com/studio.
Yeah, there's plenty. I'm not a super fan of Michael Jordan in the terms of some super fans. But I loved, in my teenage years, I loved what he was about as a competitor. You're on all the time.
Apparently he was an animal. Like
Yeah.
if you were late to training, he would roast you in front of the team, things like that.
Yeah, and and different, talking about different cultures, different times, and had to go through that experience, which conversation for another time. But I just loved his almost maniacal dedication to being the best player he could be. So he's got a book, Driven from Within, which is probably a book. It's not a picture book. Because when you say picture
Just
book,
him
that sounds like
talking
I
the whole
can't
time.
read, and
Yeah.
it's probably fair. But it's just this beautifully crafted book, and my mum got it for me when I was young.
It's one of those books with like a lot of photos and like the history and the biography.
Yeah, and
it's
it's fairly fairly heavily weighted to the shoes that sort of coincided with the time. I think it was written in 2004, so it's quite a way outdated now. But in terms of right after his sort of comeback, I think to the Wizards when he plays for them for a bit, but it sort of goes through the transformation of him and through his career. And there's some nuggets of gold in there that I just loved, around the fearing failure stuff and, his approach to that. And, just even stuff like he talks about how many shots he misses. He was, given the game-winning shots X amount of times, and he missed a lot of game-winning shots, but he also made some as well. So, but his approach was always, I want to be that guy that takes the shot. I'm not worried about if I miss it. He's thinking, I deserve to take the shot, or be, if it's chosen to be me that takes the shot, I've done the work to be there. And that was always my approach. I think there's people sort of fantasize, or some people love the idea of the player who's blasé at training, who, can roll in just that natural talent that can
like
just
a Dennis Rodman.
dominate. Yeah, but Dennis Rodman did a lot of work, and I picked that up in the Last Dance series.
Really? Okay.
So
because in the documentary they make it look like he was a bit of aloof and he was just partying like a maniac, and he just roll in last minute and play an epic game.
Absolutely, and there's certainly, I picked up that part. But then when he comes back in, and the whole team has to run shuttles because he's come back in, he's been in Vegas for a couple of days, and he does those shuttles. But then he's also, there's that image of him just watching tape, and he talks about how, if the ball goes up this way and it's spinning that way, how would I rebound it, in that certain way? So he's watching tape sounds like the way he partied, like pretty hard. But he needed that. If he's going to go and watch tape pretty hard for that amount of time, he's going to need to go blast himself in Vegas. So, there was an element of his balance doesn't look like balance to anyone else.
But to
because
him,
it's so on this sort of scale that just looks ridiculous. But it worked for him. Now, I think going back to that, it's like some players, just super gifted talent, can roll in on the weekend, bang it out. We fantasize about those type of an athlete, but I think they're the exception. They're not the rule. The rule is you've got to train, how you want to play and train to a level that, you want your game to be at, because then, you're just going to, I think, your lowest game is going to be more consistent than others if you have that attention to just trying to get yourself in the mindset and everything more often.
And now talking about talent and like, I guess, grit, and the difference between the two, I think talent is like an inherent gift or an ability to do something phenomenally almost out of instinct. Whereas grit is more, watching tape or putting in the reps and doing the training and just showing up day after day. For you, how would you highlight your talents, and how much do you think your career is talent versus grit?
Oh, this is a good discussion. I'm interested. I'll ask you a question here. Can you be talented at being gritty?
Maybe that's a talent. It's like achievement unlocked, right? I don't know. I would say that's a good question. Maybe, is it nurture or nature, right? Like, this is a great argument to have. I think, like, if I just talk about myself for a moment, like the way I grew up, I was kind of forced to be gritty. So then inherently throughout my business acumen, I'm just like, I always go back to grit. It just seems like a natural tendency for me, whereas some it might not come naturally.
You're a hustler.
Yeah, but I think that was because of the environment I grew up in. I think I was conditioned to have grit because it was a survival mechanism.
Yeah. So the nature, that does open up the nature nurture thing, doesn't it? And some may be talented at being gritty, or because I think you need both to have longevity in sport. Talent will only get to you to a point before you need some of the other areas to pick you up.
Where would you rate yourself at the beginning of your career, maybe versus the end, for like talent versus grit, if we were to separate the two?
I was talented in terms of I had a good. I was fortunate that I had good acceleration. I was robust, so I was able to stay on the park a lot, which I think is a talent. Like, some poor athletes like just have looser ligaments than others. And that sucks in rugby.
Because you have a really low injury rate.
I got injured, but
nowhere near most players.
I didn't have back-to-back bad injuries consistently, which, you got to stay on the park. Like, the most talented footballer isn't great help when he's in the ward, So I was lucky, but also, there's an element of, is it talent? No, it's not a talent, but you're resilient. So, that I can't make yourself resilient physically. It just happened. You can to an element with rehab, prehab, all that sort of stuff, but still something's going to happen. It's going to happen. I was talented. I was hungry at a young age. I aspired to, I loved, if it was Michael Jordan or Kelly Slater, because I loved surfing, or Mick Fanning, who was, an Aussie homegrown. And in terms of the rugby players that I supported and followed, George Gregan, Stephen Larkham, I loved, their success they had, and they were the best players in the world at the time in their position. And then, in my position, an Australian player that I loved was George Smith. And George Smith just had impact on the game. So then in terms of the, seeing those guys as, not idols, but somewhere in that sort of, if you want to use that as a word, it's the word that's coming to my mind. Okay, well, what parts do I need to now fill to, get to the next level? And then that was where probably the grit comes in of learning, okay, well, Michael Jordan was a demon at training.
Just a menace at training.
Mick Fanning, surfing wise, like did so much off the board. Like surfers, you kind of have this impression they're just,
relaxed.
Just go and catch the wave, man. Like, whereas he's putting in work off, in the gym, which doesn't necessarily correlate to or
Well, when you
isn't
think
that-
of surfing, you don't think of someone hitting weights in the gym.
Yeah, yeah, and getting his balance and core right and all that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of work that went in. So yeah, I think getting that right for me, which looks different to every other athlete, because what worked for me is not going to work for someone else. So you got to experiment a little bit.
Was there any moments in the game that come to mind when you really had to dig deep and have a seriously substantial amount of grit to get through?
You're talking about times.
Yeah, was there a moment or a time or even a period where you're like, man, I really need to dig deep and like get seriously gritty here?
Yeah, there's multiple times. I think I was very keen to be hungry for team success, and we didn't get a huge amount. We got a little bit, and a little bit early on in my career, and that just made it was like a drug. You just want to get some more of it. That whole holding up a trophy thing, and getting so close. We got to a World Cup final in 2015, got beat by New Zealand, and then it just became okay. This is just want to have that. Got so close, and we never got it. And it was times where it was looking like that was so hard and so far, and how could you ever get there? You're like, oh, what am I doing? I'm playing this stupid sport that you run into each other as hard as you can, and I'm sore and I'm tired and I'm traveling and I'm away from home, and but I love this, and we want to. There's a group of guys that are dedicated to try and make this happen, but it's not working, and sometimes it's at those moments where you're like, well, quitting's easier, and they're the ones where you're like, you're a mile away from home, shit isn't working, and you don't know how to get it working, and everyone's on your back, and there's pressure, and you're just like, oh well, the easiest thing is to quit. I look back on some of those times in my career and I go, oh, I'm so glad that I had those, because we had some decent success, but not crazy success. But I love those moments now in hindsight, because you work out a way, you find, there's a way around the obstacle that's in front, and a way to enjoy it differently, and a growth you can make as an individual or as a team. And there's some of the, most rewarding bits.
And I think it's so important when it comes to like performance, right? Like you got to have these bouts where things get dark or get grim. And I don't know where I saw this, but I heard someone describe it where it's essentially like, the lower you pull a rubber band, the higher it can shoot.
Yeah.
And every painting needs dark colors and light colors to create contrast. And I think for yourself, do you think that those moments where things weren't really working, you showed up hungrier, with more grit, more determination, and played better because of it?
Yeah, good question. I think there's different things that you need at different times. So, sometimes you just turn up to something, you don't want to be there, but then you're with a mate who's just like, oh, I can't, like I'm pumped to be here, and you just feed off that energy. Or some day, you wake up and you go, nah, I've had enough, and you're that guy. So that's the beauty of a team environment. And you can really just, feed off that. You talked about the optimistic hat earlier, like that guy that's running on, who just seems to be running on nitro, he's just flying at that time. And then there's other times where you need to go and do some introspection and have a look, or you read a book and you go, oh, that's a new way of doing things. I really want to implement that. And that's the motivation you get to roll back out there. Or it's just setting your sights on whatever it is you want that goal is for you, and going, I'm running to that, and I'm going to keep running to that, and knowing that, that it'd be even more rewarding getting through. But like, I think, what I did realize throughout my career is I've played with some really successful guys, like guys you'd go, anyone would trade their career for the career that these guys had. A couple World Cups, never losing certain games and all that sort of thing. And they still want more. And they still would have loved to have won this thing. It was almost funny. It was almost a realization that like, geez, like, if you won 99 out of 100 games, is it that 100 game that would dwell on some of these players' mindsets? Or is, and maybe that's not a case for everyone, but speaking to some of these guys showed me, it was like, well, we could have won that game. It's like, man, but you won every other thing. Like, it's all good. Like, I'd trade you in a second, but they'd still want more. So that put me at ease to go, stop worrying about the outcome as such, and try and get back to, how you can produce the things that could lead to that. outcome.
I think there's an interesting discussion that we can have here. I think, okay, when it comes to, let's just say, perfectionism or the pursuit of, let's take someone like Michael Jordan as the archetype for pursuit of perfectionism. Like the guy is seriously dedicated, maniacal, everything has to be perfect and well-rounded, and we have to hit the championship again and again and again. When it comes to being an athlete, or even if you're, taking lessons from being in business, I know you're involved in some business, perfectionism, is the pursuit of perfectionism in and of itself a necessity to do well?
No, I don't think so. No. Again, defining perfectionism, like, is perfection one way of doing something, or is it multiple ways of doing something?
Let me restructure maybe
Okay.
some of the thought here. Let's just say in your mind you're like, I want to win the game,
Yep.
and we want to win another championship. Well, you've already got 100 championships. Why do you need 101? And it's like, well, because I'm here, I'm in the game, I'm still relevant, and like that pursuit or the desire of another one is that innate feeling that carries you, a necessity as someone who performs in business or on the field.
Yeah, I certainly think that forward-leaning, forward-looking,
Like never satisfied, always hungry
yeah,
kind of
is
mindset.
certainly an important factor in it. If you can get the balance right and appreciate what you've done and tie it into what else you want to do, I think that's even better, because then you sort of take the sting out of this. It needs to be, trying to control, needs to be everything. Gripping, they talk about the analogy of gripping a club head too hard when you're playing golf. It's
Yeah,
like
right.
you just want to absolutely rip the thing,
And your swing sucks.
and then you duff it.
and it goes in the pond. Or it goes
just-
left when you're trying to go right.
Hold it lightly, but with the right intent to do things. And I think that will lead to a better outcome. I mean, I talked about Michael Jordan, but his coach, Phil Jackson, he talks about creating the best possible conditions for success and then enjoying the ride. And I've absolutely butchered that quote, but there's a quote in his books, what is it, like 11 rings, I think it's called, 11 rings, where he won with Bulls and 5 with the Lakers or something like that. And and that's one of his quotes where he talks about putting in all the best systems and things in place and then letting it flow. And, the rest will take care of itself.
I think there's a mindset here, and I'm trying to understand this myself recently as well, because I'm looking at myself and I'm like, okay, we're a high performing team. We do branding for a living, and I'm always like, almost like never satisfied. I'm like, what's the next caliber? What's the next project? The next thing. And my partner was asking me, she's like, you're just never satisfied. I'm like, well, there's a part of me that's just excited for the next level, and I really want to push myself there. And there's this interesting quote I saw yesterday from the founder of Airbnb, and he said, get every detail perfect, but limit the amount of details.
Oh, yeah. That's
Which
cool.
I think is an interesting paradox, because you're looking at, okay, make it perfect, but like be selective around what has to be perfect. For you, what was some of the things as an athlete at the top of the game, like what are the most important details that you have to perfect?
I'm interested with this perfection thing because, how do you put out something into the brand world, or something you put out? How do you know it's going to be perfect until you put it out there? So, I feel like if you're so worried about it being perfect, but you actually never test it, it's only going to ever stay in your house.
Right.
Yeah,
So then let me just add a definition to what I mean by perfect is like the best possible outcome.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
maybe perfection
So you sit
is
there and go, it's ready.
it's ready, and like this thing is gonna slay, like it's gonna crush. But back to I want to understand your observation here, because when you talk about gratitude and let's just say, yeah, gratitude and like, okay, cool, like I'm grateful for my house, my career, my kids, my wife, what have you, but like I want the next tier and that desire to chase it.
Yeah, it's a can of worms you're opening now, because it's healthy.
Let's open that can of worms, man.
Okay, it's healthy to be like that, but I think it's also unhealthy to always want the next thing too much. So when's enough?
Good point.
Yeah, when are you? It's difference between satisfied and like needing the next thing that isn't really important. That's maybe a little bit philosophical. Like at one point, all I want is this house, and you get the house. And then it's like, well, I now want that house. It's like, when's enough enough? So
Right.
so what is it that you're actually chasing? Like, I've heard that the idea behind a car, the actual best time of getting a new car is the lead up, the anticipation towards getting that new car.
Not
Then
the
you get
actual
the new
car.
car. And I was lucky through my career to sit in some nice cars, none of which were mine. And now I'm not in one of those cars, one of those sponsor cars, and it's a little bit different. But
If any car sponsors are listening, what do you want?
I do love the Mercedes G wagons, but
Mercedes, if you're listening. I wouldn't mind an AMG myself, but continue.
I know. I think a lot of people feel the same way, but it might just be once I drive it around for 6 months, is it the same thing? You're in.
Is the
unless
desire
you have
better
it-
than the outcome?
Yeah. So that's the next thing, and you say through my career, you won a World Cup. Well, now I want two. But at one point, one would have been enough. So how do you make the pursuit that you're undertaking worthwhile, and what does it mean to you? Or is it the pursuit that's the best thing? And sometimes I think, I mentioned earlier on, I didn't win a World Cup with a team, only one Super Rugby title. Some guys have won 10, actually, I don't know if anyone's won 10, but that would be pretty damn cool. But, but I look back and I love the journey that I had. And, at the times I hated the journey because we didn't win enough, so, I think, as corny and as cheesy it sounds, enjoy the journey, but make it worthwhile. Like put things into it, because then you enjoy the journey when you really have a crack at it.
Would you say, okay, the like, when is it enough component? Would you say that comes with maturity?
Yeah, I think as you get older, you accumulate some wisdom. I don't have that wisdom at 22 when you do anything, you give your left leg to, get one of these things. So, I think with wisdom, you realize what's important and how you can, understand that you can control what you can control, and what you can control is not much at all. Yeah, really, truthfully, it is. I've had some dealings with some great sports psychs and some mental skills coaches, and when you actually break it down, you go into a game, and I talked about how the mind works going into a game, and the things you try and control. God, I hope it's sunny weather. No control. What's the media going to write about me this week? If I go onto Instagram, which I deleted through my career because it didn't help, because Joe Blow might be sitting on the couch and go, geez, Michael Hooper's terrible rugby player. Why am I going to let that have time in my head to, he's taking real estate in my thinking going into a game. He might not know anything about rugby, but I'm giving him time. That's an uncontrollable. Or, what's going to be, is the bus going to break down on the way to the game? Oh, I usually eat a steak the night before a game. They're not serving steak in the hotel we're staying at. Oh my God, understanding what you can control. Now, what can you control? You can control your training in the lead up, and you can control your mindset leading into the game. So, which is understanding what you can control. The rest is just going to happen.
There's a quote that comes to mind about this, which is, I think it directly comes from the Bible, and it's, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And you raise a really good point, because these opinions of others oftentimes hold many people back from the thing that they want. So come back to desire. Let's just say you desire a house or a car or an amazing partner or what have you, and you want that thing, and that's innately something in you, and you're like, I want to get after it, I want to chase it. You're saying that you have to start dejecting the things you can't control, right? And then be aware of the things you can control.
Yeah. But I will say within that, we are built to have concerns about things that we can't control. That's because that is a protection mechanism. So I'm worried about what, all the guys are thinking in this room. How much am I going to let it impact me? I don't walk in here, someone offers their hand to shake. I'm not going to shake it. I'm worried about what you think. You don't want to be a dickhead.
Yeah,
And,
I gotta
and that's
give him.
good.
I gotta give him a firm grip, and you know what I mean.
Yeah, but that's good. Now, no matter how I come in and how I think it's gonna, the person that you meet is gonna have their own opinion, which I have no control over. But having a level of decorum is important in that situation. Or it's hailing outside. I have no control over hailing, but that's an important consideration, because how am I going to get home? So, within it all, that's this, importance behind thinking about what you can't control, because you're built to do that. We're social beings, all this sort of stuff. Now, I want to just preface this by this is just in my world. Like, I'm just trying to learn through my frame of mind, and when I talk about all this stuff, it's different for everyone. But this is in my world, just what I'm trying to. So I don't want to come across like I know what I'm talking about. I'm trying to learn in my my mind, and how it works and everything like that, just like anyone else.
Absolutely, man. We're all on our own journey, and I think when it comes down to it, it's this is your opinion, your expression, and how you're looking at things. Now, one thing you have talked about is some of your personal values being about growth and respect for yourself and others. And for you, why are these values so important to you?
Well, I cited some of those reasons. Look at the growth. So the growth thing, cited that, at 22, maybe I thought I knew more than I did, which is ridiculous.
As we all do when we're 22.
Which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so, very cringeworthy when I'm sitting here now thinking about it, because now I'm 32 and I realize how much I don't know. And it's...
but that happens every year, I imagine. Because like every year I'm like, damn, I was stupid when I was 33, man. But now I got to figure it out. And I reckon next year I'll be like, man, when I was 34, dude, like... what was I doing?
When you're wise and 40.
At what point do you catch up?
Yeah. So, growth and the respect side of things, I think, was respect the word you used there for the second part?
Yeah. So you talked about like having respect for yourself and for others. And now when you say respect, like what do you mean by having respect for yourself and for others? And I guess having a growth mindset around that as well.
I think the respect side of things comes from being easier on yourself, like being like caring, but understanding that God, like there's, I talked it to a nauseum probably, but the things that you can't control that are going to happen, and the mistakes that are going to be made, and that's not the scary thing, but that's the tough thing with trying to look for perfection, is we can beat ourselves so much up so much as athletes when you're trying to be perfect. But something might just happen. I think in those times, or, the way you come home, or I've got 2 kids now and, geez, I messed that. I didn't treat, my kid right in that, or he's 2.5 and I didn't give him, the leniency to just be a 2.5-year-old, and you beat yourself. I beat myself up, and, like I want to be a good dad. So you can sometimes get, I should have got that right. And so it's okay. That's the learning part of it. And then the respect for others, God, it just, I've been a prick to people, and, I regret it, but I hope to be a better person. And, at times you still got to stand up for yourself and stand up for things that you believe in. And that requires a little bit of edge, and edge is important, but not being trying to get better at not making that so, and not confrontation was the right word, but sort of, trying to be right, and accepting and that sort of thing. Trying to.
I think having children will do that to you, right? Like I've got a 4-year-old and a soon-to-be 19-month-old, and the other day I was watching my son just go on an emotional roller coaster, and I was getting frustrated. I just had to remind myself he's doing all right for 19 months. You know what I mean? Like he's got it pretty well figured out. He can eat food. He can request certain things and what have you. And it's just always putting perspective on things. Whether you're parenting or it's with your partner or with a coach or someone in business, I think sometimes you always just have to kind of check that you have the right perspective.
They're great teachers, aren't they, kids?
They're brilliant teachers, man. And it really tests you, and you think you don't have time right now, wait till you have kids. So as you mature as a person, now that you're a father, and, having been a Wallabies captain and like transitioning into commentary, and we can talk about that in a moment, like, how have you felt like having children has evolved you as a human being?
Patience. Athletes are selfish inherently. I would recommend don't have kids as you're trying to be an athlete. It's hard. It's a hard balance. And some guys, they become better as they become fathers. I don't think it was the case for me. And that's you got to go case by case. It's hard because your times. My wife, who's amazing and, has taken the lion's share of the kids. God, there's like sometimes you leave them at home with 2 young kids and you're like, oh my God, like it's hard
It's
for-
rough, man.
It's hard for whoever's, at home with the kids and dealing with them. They're exhausting, tough things. So kids, that's been great to be a part of, to see, learn. And I think so, I talk about athletes are selfish, rather, just how much you need to thank. It's a team effort in the family household as it is on the rugby field. Everyone needs balance. My wife needs time, and the kids need time. You want to look at the best teachers for flow state. Look at your kids, because how my 2.5-year-old can be going mental, and then 5 minutes later just be having the best time of his life. If that's not living in the moment, I'm not here. So you start to just view that with a less, with a lens that's really, really quite nice. But then also, things that matter when you're 20 don't matter as much when you get a bit, and I'm still young. So I reckon someone who's 15 years older than me is going, well, you know nothing. and he's right too.
How was it for you, that transition from, I guess, being able to have the ability to be more selfish, and now all of a sudden there's a little human being in the world, and you're still trying to uphold the same career, and now you're transitioning into, I guess, fatherhood, and you're trying to come to terms with that. What was that like for you?
Yeah, it's really tough. The transition for anyone in business and sport is tough, because in my world, you go from being an athlete who's given a schedule. Like, mate, you even got sleep built into your schedule. So, like,
Is that from your coach or?
Yeah, from your staff. So, like, in your staff, it'll be like 11:45 to 1 p.m. That's a sleep. You can sleep if you want. Like, how ridiculous is that?
You're like, thank you.
Yeah. So you've got your whole week mapped out. You travel. You rock up at the airport. Someone gives you a plane ticket.
Yeah.
You're with your mates all the time. You're training and staying healthy as a job, and you've got a goal. So, from doing a bit of learning and hearing about past players, what does rugby give you? And what do you need as a person? Well, you need a social aspect, you need a mental, you need a spiritual, and you need a physical. So the physical is taken care of. I'm training every day. The spiritual thing, well, I've got a goal that I'm trying to get to, or whether some guys it's I want to represent my family or pay for my family. You've got the mental, which is like I'm getting better, I'm improving, and then the social is I'm hanging out with mates. Then you finish rugby. There's none of that.
So it's almost like your whole life, from what it was in a metaphorical sense, dies.
Yeah. Well, so that's those you could argue are some of the 4 needs that you're quite important or critical, and all of a sudden they change. Now, recognizing that, and I'm learning this from others because I'm just going through this. But okay, well, maybe having a schedule for me in this next stage is really important, even if it's just scheduling, something with the family. That's going to be important. Having a goal to try and reach, that's great. Mentally trying to learn and do something new. For me, it's commentary or a business I'm involved in. That's the growth part. And then socially, well, I actually have to text my mates. I know it sounds like revolutionary stuff. But instead of just rocking up at work and, going having a coffee, I've got to actually book that in now. And for men, that sometimes is tricky.
Yeah, you're like proactively making the effort to hang versus just they're there.
Yeah. And that's tough with a family. And then there's also the needs that the family have. So how do you balance that? So, I would recommend, having a soft schedule is good, and having that. And, you mentioned that transition part. I think, if you could like sort of bring it down to one word, what's important, I'd say communication. And it's a very overarching thing, but communication with yourself and others. So, for me at home, it's kids and wife and mum and dad and my brother, and, trying to keep that conversation and communication strong, because, if it's something that's, tough for me, then communicating that's going to be good, because that's the whole asking for help thing. Like, oh, I need this, and well, maybe my wife can help me with that, or conversely, she needs this, blah blah blah. And I'd just say communication is just so important.
I think, yeah, like if I'm reflecting on a time in my life where I had my daughter, her name's Harlow, and she's 4 now, and when I first had her was like really at the beginning of when my company started to take off. Like, I was in my PJs working from my laptop, making good money from home. And now I'm hiring employees and we're working on Zoom and I got a schedule and I got a payroll and bookkeeping. Everything was changing at the same time I had my daughter. And I had a coach at the time, his name's Dan Baldry, and he said to me, well, what's your operating rhythm right now? And I said to him, what do you mean by operating rhythm? And he goes, think about your mind like it's running software. You're going from employee software to fatherhood / business software. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. And I was like, well, my routine is the same as when I was an employee. And he goes, maybe it needs to be different. Maybe you need to update your software. I went through this kind of process where I started to go, okay, well, if I just take my whole life and just go, what's my software right now? It's like wake up when I kind of want to, at least it's before work, stumble into the day and not have to be too prepared, which was how I operated. To now I got a child who wakes up every 2 hours and who needs to be fed, and everything changes. For you, when you were transitioning out of your athletic career and into, fatherhood and into, now what you're doing in business and investment and commentary, how did you manage to change your operating rhythm or your mental software?
Well, can I just say, I think that is a really cool analogy.
It's great. I can't take credit for it, but I think it's cool.
No,
yeah.
But I mean, take credit for it because I'm listening to it. So,
shout out to Dan. He kind of highlighted it because he was like, dude, like your brain is kind of running software and it's running on old software and it no longer serves what you need to do now. And I was like, holy shit. Okay, I need to start thinking like a business owner. What is that? I also need to start thinking like a father. What is that? And I need to start thinking like a good spouse or a partner to my fiance. What is that?
Yeah, and so to answer it on my world, I'd say I'm still installing. Like
You're like defragging.
Yeah, I'm still installing
like
that software because and I think this is the constant thing. It's not like you hit a point where you're like, I know it. It's just constantly sort of updating, isn't it? Like throughout. So using that sort of, you're like Apple downloads, which happen seems to be every week at the moment. It's kind of like that. It's constantly going and going. And I'm in a bit. I'm not really not nailing it at the moment. I need to pick it back up and everything like that. So, and I love that. That's a great analogy. One of my values is not like labeled in one word, but he's asking for help. So, no, not in the mental health sense, but also like how can I sit down, have a coffee with you, or how can I better understand that? So. That was certainly something, and just that communicating with people, because when you do ask for help, you realize, oh, that person had that issue too. Oh, I'm not alone in that. Oh, how did you deal with it? Oh, well, I like that, or I don't like that. Maybe I'll try that and move forward. And so that's been really important in my part of life. And then also just doing it, like making a decision, doing something and carrying on. And then in terms of like actually just getting through some of those difficult times, like I sauna. I do ice bath. One of the businesses I'm involved in is a wellness and high performance business. So that spends a bit of time, and then like just the satisfaction of trying something new, and failing. I think has been really good for me as well, because it's almost. You talked about ego. Well, it cuts that out. Cuts it straight off the legs. Like and I love the quote that I was given from, one of those previous players I mentioned earlier. It's not about what you did, it's about what you do, and I find that being really cool.
And that reigns true, because it's what's been is maybe experience or wisdom or what have you, but what you do is the really, I guess, the thing that matters. When you start reflecting on your, I guess, professional sporting career, what do you think it taught you about yourself? If you really surmount it into 2 or 3 things.
I'm probably dedicated when I set my mind to it. I think I'd be loyal in that, but then I'm also a warrior.
What type of warrior? Like samurai?
No, not warrior.
Viking?
Warrior.
Oh, like a warrior? Like
no, not a warrior. I would never consider myself a warrior.
I was like, what type?
God, no. I think, but understanding what's good and bad worry.
Okay.
So I look back on when I was 17, 18, and, you're doing things that if I had the lens on now, I probably could have, maybe managed a bit better, or, certainly things through my 20s and even recently, could I have managed that better? So I think you talk about a big software update. Geez, hitting 30 years old is a big software update.
It's a weird one.
Yeah. So, now being 30, just turning 33, it's it's been good to understand what's good and bad worry.
Good and bad worry, knowing the difference and where to put your energy. Now, I understand you have investments, but also you're moving into the world of commentary and entertainment, which is an interesting one, because I was telling you beforehand, like, I got addicted to Drive to Survive, which gave me context on Formula One. And it went from looking at cars going around a track to going, okay, they got tire degradation, they got heat, wind, track conditions, yada, yada. For you, obviously knowing the sport is phenomenal. But when you look at commentary and interviewing and all the rest of the stuff that comes with it, what's been your experience? How do you look at it? And are you applying your, I guess, athletic experience to it?
It's tricky. It's a new skill. Trying to implement a new skill. So I think that's, some players make great coaches, some players don't make good coaches, and both good players can do either. And I think that the reason is because if I was a player, I can just go out and do something, and to then be a coach and to explain it, or how do I get that person to then be the best player he can be, is a different skill set altogether. And I think it's the same for commentary. So, you may see something on the field and you just know what's happening, but then to sit back and almost be that conduit between what's happening on the field and the viewer is different altogether. And how can I explain that in a way that the viewer understands and the player's not going to think I have no idea what I'm talking about? And I was critical of commentary, and I never thought I would do it as a player, and now I'm doing it. So I'm doubling back
Joke's
on what
on you,
yeah,
yeah.
joke's on me, and I am going back on what I say a couple of years back. So fully aware of that, but things change, open mind. And but I am enjoying that challenge of trying to explain that to the viewer, and explain it in a way that, rugby's such a complex, you're playing it, you don't even understand what's going on sometimes, and the viewer sits back, I imagine, and goes, what the hell am I looking at here? So to try and give some context to what the players are trying to do to the viewer, I think is where I'm trying to come from, because a frustration for me when I was a player was, you watch a game and you're like, we were trying to do this and that wasn't described in the right way. But hey, how can you know as a commentator? Sometimes you're not in the change room, you're not in the dressing room, you don't have full scope over what the tactics of a team or a player are, so you've got to try and make it up as you go. So I probably should call up a few of the blokes I was hard on years ago and give them a break.
What's something about commentary that you found difficult that you didn't expect to?
To try and drop the the bias. Drop a bias of a team that I love and play for, or, I've had to commentate on Australia versus, New Zealand, or, and you don't, under this shirt's a gold jersey, I love Australia, and I, love Australia doing well in things. So, to try and be fair, but also, have that level of support for your own team is a really tough thing. And then there's just the time difference, man. Like I did a call the other morning. It was we had to be there at 11:45 for a 2 a.m. kickoff, and you turn up and play 80 minutes in the game. To actually do the commentary, you're there for a lot longer. And the guys are playing over in Europe at the moment. So calling that game, I was shot the next day. And then the kids are up. They wake up the same time every day. So there's no sympathy there.
They don't care.
They don't care. Whereas I probably would have got more, I had a leg to stand on when I was a player. Maybe my missus would have gone, you ever sleep in? There's none of that now.
Yeah,
So,
you don't get that luxury anymore.
No. Yep.
And what's something about commentary that you are surprised that you enjoy that you didn't expect to?
I like trying to work it out. I like trying to work out what the team's doing, and I want to, as I described, trying to make it easy for the viewer to enjoy, but also understand where the player's point of view is, or where they're coming from, or what they're trying to do on the field, and some of the stuff they have to deal with. And then when they do execute it well, how, and then if it doesn't work out, well, why? So that's been really enjoyable.
And when you're looking at it, let's just break it down into a science for a moment. Like, how do you make sure you're providing commentary that's both entertaining, insightful, and also keeps people informed live on the spot as the game's playing out?
Well, I don't know. So trying to get in the moment for it.
Yeah.
Now I've done only 2 calls in game, and aside from that, it's a bit analysis. So a formula that I used while I was playing is you got to have a circle, or I say you've got to, like everyone has to, but
You have to.
I'm not saying this for anyone else, but what worked for me is I had a circle that I knew if I asked them how I played in the game, they'd give me a real answer. And that's important. It's important because, and my mum, I'll tell you now, my mum is not one of those, because no matter how I played, good, bad, terrible, whatever, she'd always say I played well. And mums are meant to do that. So mums, that's what mums are for. But my dad, he was one person I could go, how'd I go? He goes, mate, cracking game, or not your best. You're like, great. And that's good feedback, because then I can get really objective, even though, you'd think your dad's subjective. He was good for me. He was objective. Your coach, objective. So have a tight little group that'll give you objective feedback that'll say, oh, this could have been better, or this was really good. Okay, well, this was good. May I double down on that? That needs to be better. I'll put a bit of work in. And that formula I'm trying to take into commentary. So, how'd I go to the producer? And they've been super welcoming. And at Stan Sport, I'll give them a plug, Channel 9, like they've been helpful in trying to, upskill me. And this is good. This is what the viewer is liking. This is where your safe zone is. And having a couple people in there that can give you objective quality feedback, because otherwise you just look at it again through, I might think I'm doing great, but hey, the viewer's hating that. So it's like, I think I'm playing well, but the team, it's not working within the team. So yeah, I think that's a little framework for trying to improve.
I think that's a good idea, and I think we kind of do that here with the podcast. So, like, for example, when an episode finishes, the team give me a scorecard, the team behind the scenes, and it's never about the guest. It's all about me. Tonality, question, pace, body language, expression, and like there's weird tics that I'll come up with that they kind of try to dampen out, but then something else will pop up over here, and then they dampen that out, and then something else pops up. And it's like maybe a nervous tick or a weird phrase I use again and again. I think it's so important to have this critical feedback loop. With the team giving me a scorecard, it's just an immediate feedback loop of like, hey, this is where we think you're at from our perspective. And sometimes I'll be close, and sometimes I'm way off. I'm like, that episode was terrible. I felt like I was this, this, and this. And they're like, actually, it was one of your best. Here's why. And you're like, oh, okay. So it just constantly helps you get closer to your craft, I feel.
Yeah, so important. And that you're so right. Like, oh, I played so bad. But people go, no. Like,
Crushed
pull
it.
up. You did really well, and I liked it for this reason. So it's
Or you think you
objective.
crush it, and they're like, that was shit.
Yeah. You
Don't
missed,
do it ever again.
You missed the mark. What's a bad tick? What's a tick?
So I had a few bad ticks. So one of them was like tapping my foot. The other one was like rubbing like this a lot. At one point, I had an episode where I said 276 times. When you're in a conversation, you're like, yeah. And Cabe's there, like, he showed me the screen on the pod, and he's like, here's all these lines of where you said yeah, and I had to delete it and cut it out. Just stuff like that, where it's like, oh, I never thought of how much I said yeah.
I had a good one on screen. It was one of my first analysis pieces. And, I was just, you ask a question, you're engaged. And then I got a photo back, or a screenshot back, a day or two later from someone who gave me a bit of feedback. And I was just like looking off, like not even engaged. Like, people, I'm just over here. They're like, you just got to, bit to camera, then you go to your guest, bit to camera. And I was just sort of like there, and then I'd be up here, stuff like that you just never pick up by yourself. So good.
It's those weird things you don't realize. And I think having a small circle of people that challenge you or critique you or that you can trust, I think that's a great insight. What's a quote or a mantra that you've carried with you on your journey that you wished everyone listening to this would immediately implement?
Immediately? Oh man, I wish you gave me some.
Take your time.
Some run up.
We can edit this pause out. That's fine.
Yeah. Well, that Phil Jackson one I mentioned.
It's almost like you want to have what we talked about before. You want to have that thing you're in pursuit of, but then you don't want to attach yourself to whether it happens or not. But it's the pursuit of that I think is the interesting piece.
Yeah, put the emphasis in there, not the outcome.
Yeah, put the emphasis in the energy that you're trying to make it happen, not whether it does or doesn't. Yeah. And I think for me personally, when it comes to, some events that have taken place recently in business, and Cam and I were having a conversation about this Friday night, which is like, because we're quite generous with some people we know, and at what point is our generosity sloping into stupidity? And I said to Cam, I was like, well, when it comes down to it, sometimes we just have to give things away and expect nothing. And if that's our mindset, do we want to give it away? And if the answer is still yes, cool. Don't attach yourself to the outcome.
Yeah,
If
so
the
you
answer
put
is like, hang on a second, I don't want to. Well, then don't.
So you've put a framework behind it. Yeah,
Sometimes
cool.
I think we just gotta, when things happen in business, we just have to immediately just put a framework on it. It might not be the best software, but maybe for right now, this is our piece of software. We can update it later.
Love it.
When you wake up in the morning, what gets you fired up?
I train. So since finishing rugby, I train early, first thing, and that sets my day up. I feel I'm less tired throughout the day, obviously with eating well, but it's something for me, particularly with where I'm at in my life. Like otherwise I wake up and the kids are into me. So it's a little bit of a moment that I can get to myself that I really enjoy. And I feel like the best time to get into some trainings early.
I think it's interesting. I've recently learned I'm inverted, which means that if I train in the morning, I do well. I love training at night.
Yeah, cool.
I love training at night. But what I've learned I love doing in the morning is cooking my own breakfast. I always used to skip breakfast for decades, and recently started cooking my own breakfast, and dude, game changer. My mood is 10 out of 10 instead of a 2.
Hi. What are you cooking?
Literally just eggs, sometimes a bit of toast or avocado on toast. Just the exercise of cooking and then eating makes me super happy in the morning, as long as it has coffee. Last question for you. How do you want to be remembered?
How do I want to be remembered? Just, I guess, someone that turned up, gave it a crack, but I also hate the whole give it a crack thing. Because giving it a crack means you're like, I don't just give it a crack. I think caring is important as well. So I don't know. I just want to, authentic's an overused word sometimes. So, but I would like to be that, and however people see me as being authentic, that's up to them. So I'd like people to say that, actually one thing I do want to try and do throughout my time is, not be a one-trick pony. And I don't mean that in just the footy sense, just in a personality sense, to grow. I think it's a really attractive characteristic of people that I've met and seen. And I think there's something cool in that sort of that reinvention and something different, not a jack of all trades, but someone that changed and moved the goalposts. It's cool.
Did you know that there's that quote has an ending that most don't realize? So we all know the quote, a jack of all trades, a master of none. Do you know the rest of the quote?
No.
So it's a jack of all trades, a master of none, but most oftentimes better than a master of one.
Oh, okay.
And it's interesting because it's when you take the whole quote, it feels so different than the first half. You take the first half, you're like, okay, that sounds good. But then you put it all together and you're like, hang on a second.
Yeah.
What have I been missing out on?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I actually haven't heard that. That's actually, I'll dig into that deeper.
And that's a Shakespeare quote.
Is it?
Yeah,
Okay.
it's from Shakespeare, which is, I saw somewhere recently where it was talking about there's this conspiracy that it's actually a collective of people. It wasn't one individual. Anyways, that's a conversation for another day.
I've heard that as well, because how can one person be that
He
good?
wrote some fire. He wrote a lot of fire, and he did it for a long
how
time.
can
And
he
it's
be that
like,
good?
how is it one guy?
True.
But yeah, Michael, thank you so much for diving into the minds, what it takes to be an athlete, and sharing your time with us today. I appreciate you being here, man. We'd love to get you back in the future.
No, likewise. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yo, my name's Dane Walker and I am disgustingly obsessed with branding. I had to figure out a way to do branding every single day, so I branded myself. Then, I started my agency, Rival. And hired a team of branding mavericks hell-bent on creating brands so good that they'll make your competition shit their pants. So here's the thing, you want your brand to go viral, and Rival makes brands go viral. That's why we're offering you a free 30-minute branding session to get an expert's opinion. If you don't believe me, the proof is in the pudding. Here's what clients have to say about Rival.
Rival is trusted by brands like Nutrition Warehouse, Light My Bricks, and Vumi.
So if you want to absolutely smelt the competition and make your brand go viral, hit the link below and book in your free 30-minute branding session.